views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Slavery, Jim Crow, segregation, you name it. The ugly reality of race relations in this country has not disappeared or healed with time. Daily, they're constant reminders of the progress we've made, as well as how far and how much work still needs to be done. One such reminder was the tragic weekend in Charlottesville in 2017, when white nationalists and counter-protesters clashed. Stay with us on this episode of Perspectives as we have a heavy discussion about race relationships in America 1 year after Charlottesville. That's coming up on Perspectives with yours truly, Daren Jaime.
What's on your mind?
Let 'em know.
What's on your mind? What's on your mind?
Let 'em know. Anything relevant to life, you bring it to the table. Whether you make a move solo or a movement with a stable. No fables, you speak on your decisions. Cause in the long run, it's your voice, your views, your vision. Keeping it real with many messages for you to know. This ain't radio, but DJ runs the show. Entertainment, he rocks it. Politics, he locks it. The host with the most would handle any topic. Don't forget to share your perspective with shines of light. Cause it might make a difference in someone else's life.
Make a difference.
What's your perspective?
Express what's in your heart and your mind. Share your perspective.
What's your perspective?
And hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Perspectives. I am Daren Jaime, and of course, we thank you for joining us. You can watch Perspectives every week here on BronxNet's Channel 67 Live. Of course, you can watch us also via the web at www.bronxnet.org. Social media is also very popular these days, and yes, we are on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and my own professional page, Daren C. Jaime, on Facebook. And we invite you to stay connected to us and share some information. Maybe you want to find out about an up-and-coming episode, or you want to talk about an episode you've seen. Either way you can do that. All you do is contact us, and you never know. Your perspective just might make it right here on the show. But coming up front and center on this edition of Perspectives, on a Friday in August, about 100 white nationalists marched on the campus of the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. They carried tiki torches, chanted phrases like "White Lives Matter," "You won't replace us," "Blood and soil," that alluded to the white nationalist idea that ethnic and religious diversity is white genocide. The following day, counter-protesters clashed with members of white nationalist groups. Several people were injured, and sadly, Heather Heyer, a counter-protester, was killed after white nationalists drove his car into the crowd. It's been 1 year since that sad weekend, and unfortunately, that incident was only one of many that showed the ugly reality of the racial divide and racial tensions here in America. Here now, and joining me to put this in literally all in perspective, we've got author and historian Linda Tarrant-Reid, no stranger. She's written extensively about the history and culture of Africans and African Americans in New York City and the rest of the world. She's the author of the acclaimed book, Discovering Black America, From the Age of Exploration to the 21st Century. Linda's currently working on the forthcoming book, Discovering Latino America, from pre-Columbian times to this present day. Also joining her, her husband and partner, Mr. Stuart Reid. Yes, he's the co-chairman of the Digital Divide Partners and the Streaming University Project. He began his first company back in the 1980s, trying to overcome discrimination of cable television. Yeah, right here in the South Bronx. Stuart Reid is also the executive producer and co-host of Community and Technology, a program exploring the nexus of community and technology on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem, my hometown. And also, we've got Lee Bynes, political commentator on all of our Open and BronxNet shows. Lee is also the owner of Retro Vision Media, and you can also catch him bringing issues under fire. You can check that out on the internet, where he uncovers the latest in the world of politics, goes a little bit deeper than just the surface, and if they call it fake news, Lee likes to bring the real news, all of them, here today. Thank you so much for coming and joining us here on the set of Open.
My pleasure.
So let me talk about this first of all. I'll start ladies first. Linda, we're about 1 year out of Charlottesville, as we said in the open. When we look back, we thought that that was about as worse as it can get. But a year later, we've got a lot still to talk about.
It's worse.
Right.
It's worse. Trump is still in the White House, still spewing racist epithets, taking on all kinds of people, LeBron James, you know, all different, the NFL, everybody that he's afraid of, essentially. Charlottesville a year ago was meant to be the coming out party of the Unite the Right movement. I mean, basically the alt-right organizations were scattered around the fringe, dangerous, but they had not coalesced. At Charlottesville last year, that's what they were trying to do. So when one of them murdered Heather Heyer, that really changed the dynamics of what their program was about. And they scattered back to the fringes, but they're still as violent and they're still as dangerous. But they are regrouping. And so the important thing for everybody to understand is that the venom that they're spewing is stirring up the rest of the country. When you think in terms of the racism, it's always been there. It never went away. The civil rights movement, very important because it set up the legal structure to integrate African Americans into the American society.
We'll bring your husband in on this here. Is this the first time we all did this together?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I've been here watching Linda on your show.
Yeah,
for
but
many
we had
years
to
now,
bring you to the forefront now.
Oh, thank you.
And talk to me about this because from a community perspective, you know, your grassroots, you're always speaking into the hearts and minds of people. But when you talk about Harlem, you know, the main thing that's said in Harlem is we've seen this before.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you know, Harlem is being gentrified right now. That's one of the big things that's going on. And a lot of folks see that as an invasion of white folks. And, you know, just culturally, we are under attack. Now, one of the things I just wanted to bring out, you mentioned in your open that white folks are fear of genetic annihilation. And, you know, it brings to mind Dr. Frances Cress Welsing,
Right.
MD psychiatrist, who's no longer with us, but she was very active in the 70s and 80s. And she had something that she called the color confrontation theory of racism. And that is when the European colonialists went out and started to explore outside of their European continent, they discovered as they married, or didn't marry, but as they had relations with black and brown folks around the planet, that the children always came out black and brown. And it was her theory that that was really the origin of racism, that the white folks feared that they would be genetically annihilated.
And diluted.
And diluted. And so, in a sense, that's a very real fear that they have. And I think that's a driver of a lot of their behavior. I believe that's a driver of the anti-abortion movement. I don't believe that the evangelical right and the white folks that proclaim that they're against abortion, they're not against it on a spiritual basis or religious basis. I believe it's, again, back to the genetic annihilation fear.
And they,
And let me get Lee in here, too. Your thoughts, because we were just having some conversation before we went on air, and you did say kind of like fear is a factor.
Well, you know what? I think it's probably a larger factor than we could possibly imagine, because see, when people talk about what's happening right now, they're quickly to throw out the word hate. And but hate in this environment cannot be justified. People of color, whether black or brown or red or Asians or whatever you want to call them, they've made significant strides and contributions to the progress of not only the country but the entire world. And so when you have like places like Silicon Valley and where you have a lot of high-tech jobs being unfulfilled simply because we don't have enough Americans who are qualified to take those jobs. So America is literally importing brains. And they're bringing in people from other countries, specifically Asia. You have no idea. It's undercover and not really spoken of, but there's a lot of Nigerians that are coming in on H-1B visas because they're taking jobs that are not that generally white people can't fill. And so when they look at us other, and I'll just put us all into the same category. When they look at all of us and they see that we're making advances, they see those advances coming at their expense. And so there is a fear rooted in this. Now, when you take Laura Ingraham last week, made news all over the place indicating that she didn't speak to blacks specifically, but she made it very, very clear that white people were living in a country that wouldn't be theirs much longer based upon the demographics that are changing. And when they see those changes, yes, it brings fear. If you've been living for 300, 400, 500 years with white privilege, and then all of a sudden you see that you've got to begin to share.
Right, and Linda, the margin is shrinking because when we talk about before being the majority, but when we look at the census right now, numbers are changing.
Right, and it's called the browning of America. And by 2044, the minority will be the majority, Latinos leading in the demographics. And then after Latinos come African Americans and Asians. So that's where the fear is. The fear is that the majority, the white majority, which in some places are no longer the majority. In some schools, I know in the New Rochelle School District and New Rochelle High School, the Latino students are the majority, which is really interesting because New Rochelle is a suburban, middle-class community. So what is happening is people in the rest of the country are realizing that because when you have immigrants coming into the country, they don't just settle on the coast. They go to the Midwest. They go to, the Southwest. They don't just go to New York and LA, or Florida. So what is happening is that the groups are spreading out. They're increasing their populations because many of these are women, they're families of childbearing age. What is happening with the white demographic is birth rates are declining. So that's where the fear is coming. So with immigration, what Trump is trying to do is trying to stop those families at the border. But I was reading some statistics that said it's too late for that because the brown people are already here.
All right, let's take a quick break. Coming back more, Stuart's going to talk to us. He's going to lead us off in our next segment. We're talking about the latest out of Washington, D.C. Talking about racism, Omarosa, a big topic of conversation. What does this all really mean? I'm giving Stuart a few seconds to get his thoughts together. We'll be right back.
Maybe you can make retirement happen. After all, you made this vacation happen.
Double points with every purchase?
Cleverly merging promotions.
I love it.
Cross-referencing travel sites. And booking all your flights with those...
Vouchers. I got us bumped.
They were like, oh. But now they're like... Aloha. You aced this vacation. Now get the tips you need to get on track at aceyourretirement.org.
And I can't change, even if I try, even if I wanted to. My love, she keeps me warm. 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 She keeps me warm.
We are neighbors and best friends.
I love my sister.
My heart doesn't see race. Love is love.
Our family is no less than any other family.
Love is kind. Love is patient.
And we're back here on Perspectives. Daren Jaime here with you. Before the break, we were talking a little bit about racism in America, particularly coming out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Of course, the latest as we go to air now is President Trump with the latest comments that he made with former White House employee Omarosa, talking about Omarosa, who's coming out with a tell-all book, calling her pretty much a lowlife and a dog. But calling an African-American woman a dog, even for those people who don't like Omarosa, has literally poked the bear in the communities of color, saying you can't call a woman, particularly Omarosa, a dog. And Stuart, you know, we've been talking about this for a minute. I don't think anybody, you know, most of us give Omarosa a pass when it comes to speaking on behalf of the community or having the community's heart and mind. But when we watch a president of the United States call her a dog, and as much as we may not like her, everybody stand up and saying something, because this is, I don't want to say unprecedented, but it certainly is crossing the line.
I'd say it's certainly unprecedented for a chief of state for the president of the United States. Without a doubt, it's unprecedented, and it's very clearly despicable behavior. You know, I'm not sure I would give Omarosa a pass. You know, to me, she's been very self-aggrandizing in her career. But what I am happy about what she's doing is that, as you said, she's poking the bear. I'm not really impressed with her career up to this point in time, but I'm very happy that she is raising the ire of the president as she is. And, you know, she comes from the same ilk as him in terms of her TV performance, and he's going to have a hard time combating her because she fights with the same sort of tools that he does. One thing I did want to mention, though, and Lee kind of referenced this, you know, the discrimination and the racism that we see is not just personal and interpersonal. We got to look at the systemic racism that's going on. And to me, the biggest is economic. There's economic racism across this country. Just look at the schism between the very rich and everybody else.
The wealth gap.
Yeah,
Right.
it's
About
incredible.
the wealth gap. The wealth
It's
gap
incredible.
now.
And that's racist.
Right.
That's
It's the same as
yeah.
1968. I did something with Dr. King's speech. The wealth gap in 1968 is the same percentage as it is today.
And
That's
it's increasing. And the other thing that they're going to do is they are reorganizing, they're gerrymandering.
Right.
So they're diluting our vote, but they're organizing the economics so that at some point down the road, even when the black and brown folks are in control politically, it won't matter because the economic engine is what's driving the country and driving politics and driving policy, not just in this country, but globally.
Lee, come on.
But you know, 2 points that you brought up, and we had talked about that earlier, the gentrification of our communities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if you don't have economic independence, then you cannot protect your community. And people can come from the outside, they see discounts, and then they can build up those houses, they can build up those buildings, they can turn them from rentals into co-ops, and you can't afford it. So you're moving out, they're moving in, and it's over. Where we're going when we leave, that's difficult to say at this point. But the dog and the low-life comment that he made were racist. Don't get me wrong, but I have to go back to my other issue with regards to him calling her not smart, because that not smart business follows Laura Ingram's remarks about LeBron James talking about just shut up and dribble, as though because you play basketball you don't have the intellectual capacity to make an intellectual contribution to any argument whatsoever. And then you marry that with what happened with Don Lemon and Maxine Waters, and then you see a pattern here that's undeniable. And the one thing that gets to me more than anything else is having my intellectual capacity and prowess challenged, because I'm of the opinion that a person of color can learn anything that anybody else can learn. We've proven that time and time again. Barack Obama is 10 times the intellectual person that Donald Trump could even dream of. And for him to talk about people of color in that vein is just, it gives fuel to the fire of those who need something that they can hang on to. Because I once heard a white person say that if you're not better than the N-word, you're not better than anything. And so this gives them something to hang on. And this isn't the dog whistle. It's the foghorn that Spike Lee referred to in the launching of his movie, The Klansman. That movie is timeless, timeless, unfortunately, because I have a feeling that these issues will be around for another 50 to 100 years in spite of the change in the demographics.
Yeah, I was going to say the historic perspective of these character assassinations and talking about the intellect of African Americans has been around from the beginning, because when the enslaved were brought over to this country, in order to maintain control over them, one of the campaigns was like a marketing campaign. You know, even when they had the runaway wanted enslaved person posters, they talked about, you know, brutish, strong, cannot speak well, or has, you know, some kind of impediment. And all kinds of caricatures that they were promoting. The white people were promoting that we were, you know, Jim Crow. That character is, you know, a buffoon kind of character. And so this is in keeping. So Donald Trump, with, you know, referring to Omarosa as a dog, which is subhuman, is exactly the kind of characteristic that was attached to the enslaved person to keep them, you know, below and not included into the society.
Well, that, you know what, I'd like to expound on that, because I know here in New York City specifically that African American males or black males, Latino males, they're getting a subpar education, have been for a long time. The high school graduation rate is extremely low, and if you don't have a high school diploma, you're not going anywhere in this world.
No,
and so
a college degree today is almost worthless, because you almost need a master's to be able to compete. Given the fact that you have such high unemployment rates and they start looking and comparing resumes, you have to almost have a master's with what's going on. And so I want to go back to what you talked about. We talked about economics, right? You got economics
and
you got
education.
You have education, and these are the same challenges that have been faced throughout time, which is, from a historical context, you know, again and again.
Yeah, I'm of the mind that you know, we need to stop looking to the white folks for jobs, and we need to start creating our own economic opportunities, our own businesses. Back before desegregation, there were black businesses throughout our communities because we had no choice. We had to go to black barbers, black banks, black insurance companies. All kind of black institutions evolved and grew under Jim Crow because that was the only way that we could get services.
Right.
With desegregation, black folks would say, oh, well, now I can go to a white bank. Now I can go to a white insurance company. And black businesses withered and died.
Yeah, because we had already been convinced that we ourselves, we heard those messages, you know, for centuries, that intellectually.
I just wanted to bring up one point as I reach into my pocket to pull out my smartphone. You know, technology, I think, is helping to change the equation in all of this. It's also worked against us when you look at how the alt-right has used it to organize themselves, but it's also been an organizing tool for underprivileged, underserved folks across the planet. When you look at the Arab Spring and what social media was able to do. And now when you look at how we are able to communicate with each other instantaneously over the smartphone. It's a platform, it's a device, and with the internet, we're now able to communicate globally. So this is a technology, this is a platform that we need to embrace. We are embracing them, but we need to embrace it as producers,
and
not just consumers.
And from the economy,
that's what I'm talking about.
Perspective, because you can create a business, put it on a platform, and it could go around the world. And I agree with you that, you know, segregation was a boon for black communities because we created all these businesses. The new immigrants that have come into the United States, we live in a Latino neighborhood because they don't speak English, they don't have access to banks. What they have done is created their own businesses. Many of them are contractors. They train their cousins, their brothers, their sons. They're roofers, they're electricians, they're plumbers. They're going around buying property and renovating the properties, these houses, and creating, you know, affordable housing for other immigrants. I mean, so this is something, we're here. We can be doing something like this.
I just left Alabama. I just left Alabama recently and was at the 16th Street Church where the bombing actually took place. But if you go 2 blocks down, you will find in that stretch right there over there, you've got several black barbershops, several black businesses, and all they say when you walk down there is, we haven't left. You have to create community in order to be able to survive in a time like this. And so when you talk about racism, you talk about segregation, and you talk about the bigotry that's going on, what I think we're also seeing, though, is an emergence of people creating community via technology and via other things to say, listen, this is the way that we're actually going to tackle and deal with the issues at hand. Real quickly, do we see things getting any better the next 3 to 5 years? Yes, no?
No.
No, I see us black folks, the consciousness raising. One of the positive outcomes that I see is that you never heard the term white supremacy talked about in the public media.
Right.
Never. We would talk about it among ourselves, but now it's being talked about in the public media. I think that is a positive. The fact that racism is front and center on the national agenda, I think that's a positive outcome. And I think it's going to take a while, but I think there's going to be some consciousness raising that's going to be positive that's going to come out of that.
You know, there was one positive thing that happened this weekend, because when the white supremacists and the neo-Nazis, and they had their little get-together in Washington, their numbers were rather pathetic.
I think
and when I saw
60, 40 of them.
Yeah, it was a couple of dozen tops.
Right.
Wasn't more than 30 of them at maximum, but they were outnumbered, I don't know, 1,000 to 1.
Right.
You see?
Right.
And so when I saw that, and I didn't just see black people out there, I saw brown people, Asians,
everybody.
I saw a lot of white people, and they were out there not just because of the race issue, they were out there for a plethora of reasons.
Right.
And
Let's
I
go at
think
the
with
last
regards to that,
comment.
there could be some change in the White House. I don't know what's going to be changed in the nation.
And I agree with you, because what has happened with the movement right after he was sworn in, Trump was sworn in, and you had those protests. I mean, all over, not only this country, but in other countries. So there is a movement, you know, that is growing, and it is responding to everything, including Charlottesville. And that wasn't the protesting against the skinheads. That was not just in Charlottesville, it was in other places across the country. So I think that kind of change will end up really producing some results, because that's exactly how the civil rights movement worked.
But you know what? I got to get out of here. I mean, it's hard to believe. 30 minutes goes by that quick, but when you've got 3 powerful people, intellectual, have got some great resources and some skills, it goes by like that. And unfortunately, that's about all the time I have for this edition of Perspectives. We got to bring him back again, and we'll do it again. But for all of us here on the Set of Perspectives, thanks for watching. Be sure to share your perspective with somebody else, especially in a time like this, because you never know. It just might make a difference in somebody else's life. Take care. God bless.
Cause in the long run, it's your voice, your views, your vision. Keeping it real with many messages for you to know. This ain't radio, but DJ runs the show. Entertainment, he rocks it. Politics, he locks it. The host with the most would handle any topic. Don't forget to share your perspective with shines of light, cause it might make a difference in someone else's life.
Make a difference.
What's your perspective?
Express what's in your heart and your mind. Share your perspective.
What's your perspective? Let them know.
What's on your mind?
Let them know.
Most party fouls are pretty dumb. But if you decide to drink and drive underage, you could lose your license and your freedom. Underage drinking and driving, the ultimate party foul.